maybe you say your name again and.
Tim Judson with the Nuclear Information and Resource Service. So thank you guys for this terrific presentation and overview of the issues. I have a question in terms of the recommendation that you propose in regard to long-term management of high-level waste and irradiated fuel. I mean, it sounds like you're essentially proposing perpetual institutional management and monitored retrievable storage. And NEARS, we have obviously, opposed all, repository projects that have been proposed so far, including the DGR, Yucca Mountain, WIP. But this issue of how waste is to be managed long term is, being debated, and argued out in the U.S. specifically, quite vociferously, especially with regard to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's, policies on this issue, especially as it relates to licensing of nuclear facilities in the U.S. And we challenged in court and had thrown out the NRC's so-called waste confidence policy about 3 years ago, which held the position that the environmental impacts of nuclear waste generation and storage didn't need to be considered. They then have replaced that policy with what they're calling a continued storage policy, which essentially presumes, in effect, what you're positing, which is that waste, could continue to be managed safely at reactor sites in perpetuity, being essentially repackaged every 100 years. And ironically, they implemented that policy at the, in October or fall of 2013 when the U.S. government was shut down. As a result of the budget fund. And it seems to presume if you, I mean, it's an interesting philosophical position, and I think most of us in the movement have entertained it at one point or another. But it seems to presume that we are going to have essentially, industrial societies perpetually into the future all over the world where this waste needs to be managed, and that doesn't seem to me to be realistic. Given given the time scales that we're talking about, given the technologies that are necessary in order to deal with this waste and to do the things that you're talking about.
Yes, as you can realize, we're just doing a very rapid overview here, and I think all these issues need to be discussed. We do not regard rolling stewardship as a solution to the problem. We regard rolling stewardship as an acknowledgement that we do not have a solution to the problem. This does not mean that we should stop looking for a solution to the problem, a genuine solution, rather than just abandoning it. Now, the difficulty with, we also believe that the rolling stewardship concept implies that we stop producing the waste. That's not stated explicitly here, but we assume that that's a part of it. That if you acknowledge that there is not a solution to the nuclear waste problem, then for God's sake, let's stop producing it. In fact, there have been numerous pronouncements by various governments like the United States and Canada and Britain to that effect, saying that if you cannot solve this nuclear waste problem within a finite time horizon that is reasonable, then there should be a halt to the production of nuclear waste. So that's where we're coming from. We're talking about containing and limiting the problem and stopping the production of nuclear waste, but managing responsibly the waste that's there, rather than, we feel that the industry, by wanting to dump it in Yucca Mountain or wherever, is actually wanting to clear the deck so that they can continue producing the waste forever, fooling people into thinking they've solved the problem. So we're not trying to perpetuate that. We're trying to end that, actually. We're trying to say, look, it's time to recognize that you guys were wrong, that you've been lying to us, that you have a solution, you don't, et cetera, okay? But I agree with you. There's a lot to be discussed in all of that.
And you said one thing every 100 years you would pass it on, but I think passing on every 20 or 30 years has much more power as a ritual, because the people who were in charge of it are now still alive and handing it forward to the next group of people just beginning. So there's a continuity there that I think has value.
Hello, Kevin Camps with Beyond Nuclear. Yeah, it's along the same lines, just some thoughts that came to mind. One of our board members, the founder of NEARS, Dr. Judith Johnsrud, who passed away last year, gave a speech in Sweden in 1998 where she referred to radioactive waste as a trans-solutional problem, a problem without a solution.
Mhm.
And of course, our adversaries in this fight, many times the nuclear engineers, don't like to hear that.
No.
Politicians don't like to hear that. They don't believe in such a thing as being unsolvable. But it could well be, and it is actually.
Yeah.
So another thought that came to mind was I saw the quote from Winona LaDuke in the program, and she has another great one. The one in the program is about hauling radioactive waste down a dirt road. That's the solution they've come up with after all this time. So another person mentioned in the program in the departed is Ed Grothus at Los Alamos, and I heard him speak out there, and he pointed out that the real excitement is in the weapons design. It's in the reactor design.
Right.
It's certainly not in the waste management. And also the nuclear guardianship project of Joanna Macy. So folks have been thinking along these lines, and we're really up against it though, because you know, like you mentioned, the Deep Geologic Repository at Kincardine, Ontario, on the Great Lakes shoreline, it seems like caution is really being thrown to the wind. And you know, at WIP with the underground explosion, something that is little known is that after the explosion took place, Los Alamos had the schedule to keep, right? So 100 of those exploding barrels, or potentially exploding barrels, were instantly shipped to waste control specialists in Texas, where they're sitting in the open air.
Uh-huh.
And so if they explode in the open air, there's not 2,000 feet of geology in between. And radioactivity got out at WIP and
Yeah.
blew downwind and contaminated workers.
Right.
So yeah, as Tim indicated, we're really up against some real crisis political fights right now. So I'm glad that, you know, we need to say there is no solution. We need to say stop making it. It's a very unpopular position, but we've got to, you know, we've got to win these fights, and we also have to show the way for what's to be done.
Mm.
And an important part of what you described there was the nuclear industry cannot be a part of it.
That's right.
You go to any of these government or industry functions around radioactive
I know.
waste specifically, and it's all about the money that's to be made. I mean, we
Absolutely.
just went to one last week at the U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, just to alert people in the room. One of their new crazy ideas is called deep borehole disposal,
Right.
and they could do it's 3 to 5 kilometers deep.
It's not a new idea. It's
It's
been
an
around
old
for a long
idea,
time.
but they're pushing it again. The Department of Energy has a breakneck test program underway where they will choose their contractor to carry it out within the next 6 months and actually begin work a year from now. And 3 to 5 kilometers deep, drop 40 of these containers down this deep hole, backfill it, and walk away.
Yeah.
Call it done. And my point was that in that room there were the companies, Nuclear Assurance Corporation, NAC, you had Holtec. These are the manufacturers of the containers, and others who would make money. The drillers were in the room. So it's the money to be made that's driving their motivation.
Well, you're absolutely right, and there's a lot more to this rolling stewardship concept than we're not putting it forward as a solution, as I say. We're putting it forward as an ethical management procedure for the time being, at least until we come up with a better idea. Abandonment is not, in our opinion, a good idea, period. The idea of taking it out of the hands of the industry is also implicit in the concept of rolling stewardship. If the industry is going to be winding down as it is, then this waste is going to be there long after the industry is gone. This has to become a societal undertaking, and it should be taken out of the hands of the industry as soon as possible and put into the hands of people who are not connected to the promotion of the industry or to the expansion of either the weapons or the nuclear power industry. They can draw upon the expertise of people in those industries by hiring them to do specific jobs, but they should not be in the driver's seat. So there's a whole lot of considerations here. But we believe that in actual fact, a failed repository ends up being an unmonitored, unretrievable situation, which is terrible, and because it has not been planned. So we feel that planning for rolling stewardship, making sure that the resources and the manpower are there, and that the manpower is not corrupted by other motives other than making it as safe as possible, would be a genuine step forward. And as I say, implicit upon all this is blowing the whistle on the basic lie that the nuclear industry has been putting forward, and which is the basis of the U.S. law that led to Yucca Mountain, it's based on a lie. And the lie is, we know how to handle this stuff. We know how to dispose of it. We know how to get rid of it. And that's the basis upon which that law was passed. We have to blow the whistle and say, that was a lie, and we do not have a solution, and we have to plan seriously about how to manage this stuff responsibly in the near term and the long term, insofar as we can. So, and by the way, this does not mean that below ground is not a good idea. Maybe below ground is a good idea, but not abandonment. So there's a lot of aspects here that all of which can be discussed, and of course we don't pretend that we have the answer to all the questions. But I do believe that we should not allow the industry and the regulator to keep stringing people along. That basically we have a solution, we just haven't implemented it yet.
There are many questions, and we can continue, but we have a program. And Megan, would you like to make a short remark? Because I
think it's a quick question. Based on my own experience of being a high school chemistry teacher in Nigeria for about 27 years and using much of what you were saying as my vehicle for teaching basic chemistry and finding these kids really fascinated and able to take it in. Has this been somehow broken up and distilled down into possible ways of using it in basic high school chemistry, and to get this kind of thinking going at that level?
I would love to do that. In Canada, we have a government which is very committed to nuclear power. The nuclear industry was created by the Canadian government. The uranium industry was created by the Canadian government. And it's very difficult to get permission. Although they get nuclear propaganda into the schools, it's very difficult to get alternative points of view into the schools. But yes, I would love to participate in that. I'm an educator myself, and what I like to do is to prepare materials which can be used, but I'm not the one to get it into the classroom. I wish there were a way of doing it that was simple. I don't know of one. But it's a very good idea.
well.